Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again back to TechQT. It's been a busy week, as usual, in the broadband world and networking world in general. I have a number of stories which I'd like to get into. Unfortunately, all the people who are the sources for these stories are unavailable because they are traveling. But hopefully we'll bring those to you next week. Lindsay, you have been scanning the headlines. I understand you've got one or two interesting stories coming up about Google in America. Would you like to kick off with that?
Yes, let's. I see from Kansas City that there are an increase in numbers of complaints about Google Fiber, which it's not about the connection, it's about the process of getting people connected, where there seems to be, as the contractors are rushing to roll it out to an increasing number of people, because of course the demand is really high, there have been problems cutting through lawns and not replacing the damage on the sort of lower end of the damage scale, through to cutting through sewage pipes and gas lines, which presumably is creating headaches for the emergency departments, etc., etc. So it's quite interesting that, you know, Google are increasing the number of cities that they're taking Google Fiber to, and they are facing these problems, which presumably are going to have to be ironed out. And of course, we're not facing similar problems in the UK for one really, really simple reason, which is that BT are not doing fibre to their premises or fibre to the home in the vast majority of cases. But hopefully, at some point, we will progress to that stage, and you would hope that some of the lessons that Google Fiber and its contractors and the consumers are learning in Kansas City, for example, are going to be addressed when we get to the UK and digging up Englishman's green and pleasant land, his back garden, etc., etc. But it does seem to be a bit of a problem over there.
Right. So if it's a problem in America, why should it become a problem in the UK? I know that in Norway, for instance, when the guys go in to put in fiber, they dig up the streets. They tend to lay electricity and sewage and water and all the other reticulation systems as well. But they allow you, the house owner, to dig to the curb. Is that not a possibility?
Do you think that's likely to happen in the UK? I mean, Barn in particular, I don't think GigaClear has quite the same issues because the GigaClear contractors do all of it. But in Barn, I know that there are plenty of householders who are too old or infirm who can't do this, and therefore they're assisted by members of the community and their neighbours. And obviously, if you're a neighbour doing it, you really, really want to make sure that you're going to get that job correct. Whereas I guess if you're a contractor and you've got 10 other connections to do today, you might be slightly less diligent about the state of the turf when you return it into the garden, for instance. Or the householder might not know exactly where the utilities are in a lot of cases. I mean, I know Barn has equipment to do everything is, and quite often, especially in rural areas, people have lived in their homes occasionally for more than one generation, you know, lots of generations back to the Magna Carta almost. So therefore, the householder knows precisely where everything is. And I mean, at the moment, we don't have this issue at all because it's fibre to the cabinet and you're just using that cruddy bit of copper still into your home, and there's no reason to dig it up. But I mean, what you're saying about Norway is interesting. I haven't seen any great evidence in Britain that we join the dots when digging holes in the streets.
Oh, well,
we don't put all the utilities in it.
I think that's certainly true. But another way to get around this would be to do what Metronet is doing in Manchester, which is fibre to an aggregation point and then high-speed wireless, point-to-point wireless to the premises.
It's not fibre to the home, though, is it?
It's not fibre to the home, but possibly that's just an interim thing to do.
It's a much better stepping stone. I mean, fibre to the pump, as it were, which, you know, many of us really, really hope that BD UK were going to do, and then They dropped the ball a little bit on that one. And then using wireless, because of course the wireless can be upgraded, and you've brought the fibre at that point to a much closer aggregation point than, say, if you're just using cabinets, which, you know, we know already that you stated some of the numbers last week. I seem to recall that there was at least 1 million people who are not going to be connected this time around, and we know that many people are too far from a cab now and will remain so for fibre to the cabinet to actually deliver any sort of high-speed broadband. It's going to be, for the close people, it's going to be a step up. For anyone further away, it's just going to be another disappointment, I guess.
Yes, well, with an election coming up in 2015, how do you think that's going to go down?
Well, it depends how many more urgent problems this government managed to present to the population prior to the election date. I mean, you know, for some of us, broadband is the most important issue, but with the NHS cuts, losses of things like the Independent Living Fund for the disabled, issues with education, worries about whether or not HS2 is going ahead versus broadband connections to the entire country, etc., etc., etc. And of course, that old perennial, when there's problems at home, start a war somewhere else, which we seem to be doing rather well at the moment. It could be that broadband isn't as high an issue on the electoral agenda as people like you and I think it should be.
Well, if all the numbers that relate to the economic improvement that broadband access brings, and the government has claimed a 20-to-1 return on investment, it makes a lot of sense for them to be spending the money. So it would be nice to see it. Now,
it would. Sense and government, though, don't always fit in the same phrase, do they?
Well, I've been seeing some correspondence between the Minister for Communications and some people in Newhurst, suggesting that possibly the Surrey broadband rollout is not quite what it's cracked up to be. But the Minister seems to be quite sanguine about it and saying it will be all right on the night, dear.
Yeah, but luckily for him, he probably won't be in the same position and be answerable when it isn't.
Well, 2015 roll on. Let's see what happens to Mr. Vasey.
Let's see. Guy, let's move on. Going back to Google Fiber, only sort of briefly as an aside in a way, there's a lot of talk in America about how you don't need Google Fiber to get gigabit, and therefore there's a lot more movement than there was even with all the funding rounds a couple of years ago for municipalities to investigate all the different ways of putting in their own gigabit connections, because almost entirely because of the known economic benefits of providing this, as well as the social capital that is accrued from it, and the inclusion agenda is met obviously if you have more people in your community who are connected. And there's some quite interesting examples coming out now of successful initiatives and the different models for doing it. Obviously in America, as I saw when on my visits, things are a little bit different about there. For instance, they have municipal bonds to raise money from within the community, and which we sadly don't really have an equivalent of here. I mean, I suppose you could use the Public Works Department, but it's slightly different. And
well,
so...
Sorry, Lindsay, can I just interrupt there?
Yeah.
That raising municipal bonds and earmarking them for particular projects is perfectly doable here. There is nothing to stop councils from doing it.
Why aren't they then?
That is a very good question. The councils that I have asked, and I've asked about half a dozen, have yet to come back to me on it. But I'm told...
Get some answers.
I am told there is absolutely nothing stopping them. One person said that in their opinion, the only thing that might be stopping them is that because they get their money from central government, as soon as central government sees them starting to raise money, then they're going to cut the money that comes from central by that much.
So no better off. It sounds like the normal benefit system when you try going back to work, to be honest. I mean, you know, you end up no better, no worse, and sometimes worse off because you lose your housing benefit at the same time. So more joined up thinking from government, yippee. Anyway, let's just look at some of these different models, right? So there's a couple of places are doing municipal networks as a partnership with commercial companies who are adopting what I absolutely believe is the right way to do it, which is sort of outside in. So instead of starting by connecting the main city and the rich guys, they're starting by, and therefore picking the low-hanging fruit, they're starting by connecting low income and areas which would normally be or have shown to be low adoption. So this sort of, you know, allows them to create a model whereby they know that they're in the worst case scenario from the beginning onwards, things can only get better. So this is quite interesting because this is definitely not what has happened in the UK at all. You know, that we've seen the incumbent and the same with mobile companies as well, who have literally cherry-picked the areas where they're going to get the highest adoption rate and where, you know, I mean, we won't name a company, but who, say, pick the Thames Valley as an area to connect first, because obviously you have people there with more dosh. So it's quite nice to see alternatives, you know, going for literally the other end of the scale. We're also seeing in America a lot of public, so councils, etc., the equivalent thereof, going with utility companies. So obviously the two most famous of those are Chattanooga in Tennessee with EPB and Lafayette Fiber in Louisiana. And it's quite interesting that a lot of the electricity companies, for instance, are having to look at green energy. So we are now seeing development of broadband utility companies with electric, where we're seeing much more solar and wind being built into it. Now, this is quite an interesting development. And this, to me, in communities in the UK, say, or across Europe, is something that definitely bears thinking about, because that would help back up some of the, say, low adoption rates on the broadband, where people, you know, aren't sure quite yet if they want that gigabit broadband, but they know that they want to be sustainable and not be maybe party to China switching off the electricity because they seem to own most of our electric networks. And, you know, then there's all the nuclear power stuff as well that also is no longer British. So that's I find that quite an interesting development, and it'd be good to see what happens out in the States with that.
Okay.
And also they're playing around with...
Let's just take a couple of points from that.
Okay.
In the States, you've got essentially a duopoly. A duopoly in fixed line, which is AT&T and Verizon, and then you've got another duopoly in mobile, which is pretty much AT&T and the other guys, whose name escapes me, with T-Mobile playing sort of a gooseberry to the other guys. But what we've seen there is that the prices are much higher in America than they are in Europe for, you know, on unit cost. You know, pick a number, and America is something like twice the cost. That might be okay in a rich country like America, but I know that America's income distribution is pretty dispersed anyway. But that does seem to be an issue that Europe is beginning to look at. Just this week, there's the competition authorities gave the okay for Telefonica to buy a German cable company, and that's going to reduce competition from 4 to 3 in the mobile space. But so that's something for us to consider. At the moment, we've got 2 physical mobile networks, one which is Telefonica and Vodafone, the other one which is owned by the other guys, EE, and with 3 hanging on to it. Now, I don't know where you want to have competition in this area. BT's got the fixed line network. These other guys, you can have Arqiva as a potential third-party wireless carrier, but it seems to me that the market is already constrained in terms of the physical infrastructure that we've got.
A lot of the physical infrastructure, though, is pretty impoverished, isn't it? I mean, if what we need to do is attract investment into upgrade and all the rest of it, then I'm not saying that you want to be spreading the jam too thin, but we definitely need some new thinking into the whole thing. I saw the thing about E Plus being bought out by Telefonica and everything, and you know, the natural sort of knee-jerk thing is, oh, cool, now there's only 3 people to choose from, and that is that good for consumers? Well, not always, especially when you've got a limited amount of infrastructure. I mean, as we know, the vast majority of people who buy broadband in the UK, unless they're buying it from Virgin and buying it from BT, it's just under a different label.
Sure.
And to me, that is an issue. I mean, what we are seeing in America is that as more municipal networks and communities set up, the big guys are actually responding in a very positive manner. I mean, in places where they haven't been doing anything for years, they suddenly increase the product set, they upgrade their network, they drop their prices, because all of a sudden they're being threatened by a community network, whether it's built by a bunch of farmers or whether it's being built as a corporate thing or whether it's being built as a joint venture between the municipality and whoever, and to me that competition is a good thing, because it does give the consumers much more choice, and it does maybe kick the big guys where it hurts a little bit, make them do stuff that they should have been doing years ago. So,
well, I think we've certainly seen that with Barn. As soon as Barn announced where it was going to do, then BT said, oh, we're going to do that too. And as a result, there was a lot of argy-bargy about raised expectations, and so far it seems to be largely unmet on the BT side. We were talking about...
Yes.
Anyway, but the other thing I wanted to mention is that this inside-out, or I beg your pardon, outside-in idea. Germany's tried this with the rollout of 4G mobile telephony. The guys said, if you want a license, you have to do it in the unserved places first. And the thinking behind this was that, firstly, those people need to be connected. So that was, if you like, a social imperative. The question then was, how do you persuade the guys the operators to build out there? And the simple thing was that if they didn't, then they didn't get their licenses, and they would find it probably pretty hard to renew their 3rd generation and 2nd generation licenses. So they kind of were over a barrel, so they've done it. But what's happened is that they built cheap. They built fast and they built cheap. And what they found was that as soon as the farmers, people living in the rural areas, discovered that there was a line, there was access, they suddenly flooded it, and as a result, the contention on the lines was massive. So that proved one thing, that there's a market out there. The other thing it proved is that there's always, you can always spend more money building or adding capacity, but it's been a problem, as I understand it, for Germany. And as a result of that, the prices that people are paying have been creeping up and up and up. And we've just seen that the competition authority is saying yes to the deal with E2 and Telefonica, so that suggests that at the policy-making level, there is going to be more of an acceptance that these guys need more money and therefore higher prices at the retail sector in order for them to build out the network. There's got to be a caveat, to my mind, there's got to be a caveat there which says, okay, if we're going to let you have high prices, then you have to build the network. And so far, I haven't seen that correlation put into anything hard.
Well, I mean, this sort of hard evidence showing that there is demand in rural areas, and that, you know, for instance, in the network planning, in that instance that you're talking about, to have built cheap and fast without sufficient capacity, you know, it shows a sort of serious lack of understanding of life in rural areas, to be honest. But it also makes one question why a mere 10 million quid has been put into the innovation fund when we know that at least 5% of the population is not going to get reached with the BDUK rollout. 10 million quid is a pitifully small amount of money. I know it's only an innovation, and yes, I'm sure they're going to follow it up with yet more money, but, you know, this, why not just accept the facts that they are? In countries across the world, it has been proven that rural areas are more needy for comms because they're further away from the basic facilities such as hospitals, etc., etc. And, you know, to then restrict the amount of money, and to, you know, some of the comments around the innovation fund, I mean, it just seem ridiculous, really. Satellite is not a new technology, doesn't need any innovation around it. It's certainly not the most appropriate in a lot of instances, bearing in mind all those figures that have been put out about people who need 165 meg by 2016 or whatever it was. You know, to even put any money into that, and then, you know, add salt to the wound by calling it innovation, seems to me completely ridiculous. That what we're going to have happening after post 2015 and the election, post 2017 when BDUK supposedly comes to an end, is that we're going to have to take stock again and go, oh, hang on a minute. Oh, it looks like the rural areas need something better than that we managed to provide. But some of us have been saying this since before the millennium, that this is what's going to happen. And I don't know quite how long everybody has to keep shouting at Westminster and Whitehall from out in the boondocks, saying, you know, you really need to build a better network out there. And the evidence is now, you know, there, clearly on a plate from rural areas of America, Germany, Austria, Spain, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Finland, you name them. Every country has had these issues with rural areas, and very few have actually sort of bitten the bullet and gone from the beginning, let's do outside in. The biggest costs are those where we cover the smallest number of people out in the rural areas. If we can cover those costs, then the capital and the revenue, well, the revenue starts flowing in to the centre to do where we're picking the low-hanging fruit. I mean, you know, to avoid this basic economic sort of I can't think of the word, thingy, it just seems to me completely foolish. We're throwing money hand over fist at not solving the problem. Sorry, ran over.
Okay.
You know, it's my favourite.
All right. Well, let me try and put a smile on your face about this thing. I was at the Cambridge the Future of Wireless conference earlier this week, and I interviewed Professor Simon Saunders from Real Wireless. Simon did a lot of research into how you serve the final 5%, and he's got some very fancy maps and things like that. And he says it's actually pretty easy because the people who live in the rural areas tend to cluster in little villages. There are relatively few people who live out on farms and things like that. So actually what happens is that where you've got hamlets, communities, you've probably got 100 people or so, quite densely populated, which means that you can service those people relatively cheaply. And he, the sums that he's come up with, he says, if you take the small cell technology that people are developing now and using for urban deployments of 4G mobile, put that into the sticks. Put it into the little villages. It's got the power and capacity requirements that you need for that community, and backhaul it using satellite. Satellite is, hang on, backhaul it using satellite because not everybody is going to be online at the same time. he thinks. Um, I, I, I'm just telling you what he said, okay? So you can be skeptical as anything, and I am also skeptical. But Simon says that this is highly possible. And as a result of the models that he managed to show Ofcom, Ofcom changed its requirement for the coverage obligation under the 800 megahertz license in the 4G license, or sorry, 4G auction that we've just had. And they found a buyer in O2, because O2 looked at it and said, yeah, okay, those numbers add up for us. So this is likely how O2 is going to be doing it. I haven't had a chance to speak to O2 directly about it, but they are high on my list of people to speak to and see how things going, guys. Are the numbers panning out?
Do you know, I just don't. I'm sorry. Like, in 2002, we had a product called 10 and You're There, which was basically satellite fed into 10 homes via wireless access points, right? And back in those days, satellites, as I remember, were definitely 2 meg. And I think there were a couple that we might have up to 4 meg, right? Whereas, and of course, data requirements back then were a lot reduced from how they are 12 years later. People were streaming videos, iPlayer didn't exist, YouTube didn't exist, etc., etc. So, you know, I mean, Skype was about, but it was pretty compressed at the time. But even so, the satellite struggled a little bit. And now satellite's up to 20 meg. You put 10 people on it now, the usage of data has gone up by way more than 10 times. I would have a huge amount of doubt about backhauling with a satellite, to be really frank. Like, good luck to him, but I can see that satellite being pulled out and being replaced with a fibre pump, as it were, fairly quickly. Because once you go over your data limit on your satellite, it gets really, really expensive. You might as well be putting in a fat pipe from the word go. And not running up even the first one of those bills. It's a bit like roaming abroad with your mobile. You know, it can get frightening very, very, very quickly. So I'm as sceptical as I think you are on that solution. But it's changed.
Avantian says are part of the DCMS's innovation program. So perhaps we should get them on here and get them to go through the numbers with us.
Yeah, let's. I mean, I'd like to hear the justification for it. And, you know, I know that, I mean, I'm on a satellite right now, and that's my only option. And this is the second time in my life this has been my only option. And it is, you know, luckily I'm not trying to do lots of real-time stuff, you know, like live video conferencing or anything like that. If I was a gamer, I would find it so frustrating. If I was trying to do a lot of, mind you, my upload is a hell of a lot better than I ever got on ADSL by a mile. You know, I can see 10 meg upload regularly, and I've never ever seen that. Even with bonded ADSL, I've never seen that. So, I mean, good luck, and I'm glad it's managed to change the spec for the option. I think it's just another stepping stone. This is the problem, isn't it? Lots of it is stepping stones instead of really sitting down and going, hey, look, we've got a problem. This problem is not going to go away. It's been, well, when I started fighting for broadband in 1994-ish, I met people then who'd been involved in the game for 20 odd years at that point. So at some point we have to sit down and say, you know, just before we celebrate the diamond jubilee of no broadband policy in Britain that works, perhaps we should come up with one that does work.
Well, if I remember correctly, Peter Cochrane, who was the ex-CTO of BT and the guy who found that they could do fibre cheaper than copper throughout Britain. It was 1984 he discovered it, so this is the 30th anniversary of that. Other technologies have taken 30 years to become ubiquitous. why hasn't fiber become ubiquitous? It's a
Because it
puzzle to me.
scares the hell out of people. It does scare the hell out of people. It's disruptive. Fibre is really disruptive to a whole host of things, from, you know, politics and people being able to have their say, through to TV, through to, you know, the aged old incumbent with its lovely bits of copper, etc., which, you know, most of us feel should be pulled out of the ground and turned into kettles. Fibre is too disruptive and it's too scary. And the fact that you know, look at the economic benefits that are being proven elsewhere. I mean, they should just really overcome the fear. It is fear that policymakers in particular seem to have about all of this.
Well, is it
I
fear
find
or
it very.
vested interest? Really? Combination?
Don't know. Let's get a few of them on as well and ask them.
All right. One of the things I just want to mention in passing, Broken Telephone, which is the little blog that I do, carried a story this week about the problems of superfast broadband in Wales. Regular readers and possibly some of the viewers might remember that this has been challenged by Richard Brown, who's an independent broadband consultant, and partly as a result of Richard's questioning about the promises made for superfast broadband in Wales. The Welsh Audit Office is taking a look at the project to see if people are going to get what they expect for the money that they are, the 425 million quid that's going into the project. Richard sent in a Freedom of Information request asking for the test data and the methodology by which a junior minister claimed that more than 100,000 houses were connected at an average speed of 61 megabits a second. And he got back a standard wishy-washy letter from the Welsh government saying, oh, we're going to publish this information in due course. It would appear that this information is going to come out in summer. Well, we're into July now. I don't know when summer starts in Wales, but if it ever does.
It doesn't. Surely that's you know, there is no summer in Wales. This is a get-out clause, surely.
Right. Well, the thing is that Richard said he doesn't accept that as an excuse. He believes that they're just trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes, and he believes that the Information Commissioner's office needs to look at this because he believes that the Welsh government might be in breach of the various or elements of the Freedom of Information Act. So we will continue to watch this space and bring you further news as and when it happens.
Don't you think, though, what Richard, as you know, with his freedom of information and stuff, is finding out is really indicative of what's going on elsewhere as well? And we've had this a few times over. Finding out exactly what our public money is being spent on and what's being delivered for the cash is almost impossible. So, like, as an example, I'll use Project Access in Cumbria, right? Which cost somewhere in the region of 21 million quid. We were told that all of Cumbria would have broadband at the end of it. You know, we struggled to find people who had got broadband at the end of it. In fact, the primary schools and the grammar schools had lost broadband by the end of it because someone in their wisdom had decided to replicate the Clio wireless network, which was causing interference to the schools who were already connected. You know, we asked and asked and asked, how exactly is this money being spent? We did manage to establish Commendium, for instance, a consultancy company had got a watch of it to educate people about broadband in Cumbria and to encourage businesses to get connected. But one of the films that they used was firstly it was from Lancashire, not from Cumbria, and it was made by Chris Condor and her crew, not by anyone who was actually paid for it. So, I mean, I think that's right. I'm sure Chris will correct me if I'm wrong, but it was very similar to that. The finding out after the event what Project Access money had been spent on, we were told that Project Access was one of the most successful in Europe. It was given an award in Brussels for its success. on the ground, it was bordering on bloody impossible, excuse my French, to actually see any result of project access short of a few people getting a shindig to Brussels and handing out rubber sheep. Stress busters. Boy, did we need them. When you try and find out the truth of what's going on with these projects and this public money, it is bordering on impossible. We're seeing with BDUK that apparently no maps can be put out yet because it's commercially sensitive. Well, at what point are people, because if the maps aren't put out prior and they're not put out after, all that we have after is people saying, I'm not connected, then there's no way of anyone actually saying, well, I was supposed to be connected because there are no maps to compare them to, you know. So we never actually hear what the money is officially being spent on and to whom, and then we can't dispute the results afterwards because no one's ever actually clarified where this money's going. And, you know, I find the whole thing is really worrying. What's going on in Wales, to have some junior minister just gaily spouting off that people are going to be connected at an average of 61 meg, and I bet you anything, he said megabyte, anything, I'll bet you a metal bucket, he said megabyte, and yet there is no proof that this is the case, and that, you know, when everything is kept hidden behind closed doors and that freedom of information requests to try and access this information to just ask, let alone challenge what our money is being spent on, are being treated in this manner. I find it really, it's a bit of an indictment on Britain, to be honest, that we're not even allowed to ask where all of this money is going. And for people to be open and honest, if it's commercially sensitive, great, because that means that we'll have more people going, oh look, there's going to be a gap here, let's step in and fill it, even if we're only the interim measure. We'll have a quick exit strategy when the incumbent finally get round to this area, and we'll wave our goodbyes, and the community, or, you know, the town or the city or wherever, can be connected by the incumbent at due time. And it's not happening. We're just being told no FOIs, no freedom of information, no nothing. Commercially sensitive. Look at Ewhurst. Prime example.
Yeah. Now, I've always thought that if I was the MD of OpenReach and I had carte blanche, I didn't have somebody looking over my shoulder in a different boardroom, I would be saying to all the little communities, guys, we can build a fiber to you, but you have to dig your way to meet us here. And
well, that's what we thought Felen was going to be, and it wasn't, was it?
Sorry, Linz, I didn't
Felen got money. Sorry, Felen could have been precisely that. Felen had the money, you know, they had the support of the local community. All BT had to do was dig to a pump, basically, and leave the community to it. But BT just cannot bear not to have their finger right through and out the other side of the pie.
Right. It's I'm reluctant to touch on this, but isn't there a national security issue about this as well? I mean, how much do we know about how important it is, or the government believes it is, to be able to watch every single email and every single Google Hangout and what have you?
Good luck to them. I mean, you know, you hear all the NSA and GCHQ stuff and everything, and they really want to know what this many of us had for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and what TV programs. Why, really? You know, why? I just.
Well, I mean, it's the same reason that Google and Facebook and Twitter and Amazon collect all this information about what we like, what we, you know, who we talk to, what we buy, and what we like, and so on, because that's allows them to collect that data, sell that data to people who want to sell us stuff, basically.
Well, I mean, if it just comes down to flogging data about user habits, right? So, for instance, Amazon, I can fully understand that they want to understand, just like Tesco, want to understand what we buy, what days, when to, you know, when the inventory should be restocked and all that sort of stuff, right? Amazon also want to know what are the things that are going to sell. This is all about literally making money and staying profitable. When it comes down to our government wishing to know the same thing, If what it is that they're doing is flogging our data, I have a big issue. I had a really big issue when one of my kids was sent a credit card application form way before they were 18, right? And it turned out the data had been sold by our local county council. Now, I bloody object to that. Our council is not there to make money out of the data of the citizens within its boundaries. That just is not one of its purposes at all. And, you know, the fact that they couldn't fix a streetlight for 8 months probably had too many people tied up data mining instead of working out whether or not to send an overhead or an underground crew to fix a streetlight in a road, you know. I mean, I don't
Sorry,
want...
Lynn, before we go too far down this track, let me just come back to this thing about data collection, because this week the news also broke that Facebook has been conducting psychological experiments on 750,000 of us. One of the reasons why I'm not on Facebook, because I just don't trust those guys anymore. But what's happened is that instead of just collecting and flogging the data about what we are, they are now trying, it appears, they're experimenting with manipulating us into buying stuff that possibly we never knew we needed.
The Facebook experiment is not about purchasing, it's a psyop. It's about psychological manipulation, right? And that has way more scary ramifications. This is not about getting you to read the adverts on one side of Facebook. This was about manipulating people's emotional responses to what was being manipulated into their timeline. So they were cutting out, say, any positive messages from friends, etc., that were turning up on people's walls to see how they then responded to a full-time, full-on negative stream. This is psyops. I mean,
yes,
that is really, really worrying.
But Facebook is a commercial company. The bottom line must be to sell that information, that capacity to manipulate our emotions and our feelings,
and Ian,
in such a way that we buy stuff.
Who is, no, not rubbish, who is likely to be, sorry to be so blunt, who is likely to be the biggest potential purchaser of such data? Surely it is the government. Any government. Not necessarily, you know, the government of the nation in which you live. I mean, this is propaganda, Tavistock stuff, and it's worrying. And we've been seeing more and more of this sort of propaganda type thing occurring through mainstream media over the last few years. It's not just Facebook at all. And it's, you know, I find this far more worrying than the fact that, you know, BT can't do fibre to the home, to be honest, obviously.
Well, you would think that if the government found that the Facebook experiment is worth pursuing, that's one way to get fibre to us quickly. One reason to get fibre to us quickly.
I'll sell my soul for a fibre connection. Why not? Where do I sign?
Right, okay. Well, you don't have to sell it. The government will buy it from you.
Well, via a third party, you don't actually pay me anything for it. That's how it seems to work with Facebook, isn't it?
Indeed. Indeed. Okay. I just wanted to come back to your point about the difficulty of finding out where the money's going. There was another story which came across my desk this week, which is the fundamental difficulty of finding out how BT's regulated prices are set. This came out of the Ofcom consultation into the Fixed Market Access Review, which is basically looking at the prices that Openreach is allowed to charge for its copper lines to people's houses. And firstly, the model that Ofcom uses assumes an all-copper network, so even including the core network, which hasn't been copper for decades, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So Ofcom's got to do some adjusting to its model and stuff. But also there are key components of the cost, such as the business rates that BT pays on its infrastructure, and BT's evaluated in a different format to everyone else. And there have been court cases which have accused BT of using this as a competitive weapon against its competitors. Those cases have all been lost, unfortunately, but there certainly seems, and the last time that it was heard in the courts, it was a split decision with one of the judges saying that it does look as if there's grounds for a complaint here. But the point of this is that the Valuation Office Agency and the model that it uses to evaluate what BT's due to pay in business rates, that model is hidden. So we have no idea how it accounts for BT's costs. The other thing there is that BT has several different sets of accounts, it seems, because the Ofcom it's got regulated or statutory regulatory financial, or the statutory information that it's required to give under its obligations. That's one set of numbers. The set of numbers that it gives to the London Stock Exchange is another set of numbers, and then Ofcom was able to get a third set of numbers, which it then used in order to on Openreach's costs, which it used to set the wireline price. I ask you, what should we be doing here?
No, I mean, imagine if all of us who had our own companies could operate on 3 sets of books. HMRC would be really, really busy, wouldn't they? I find the business rate thing actually quite offensive, because it's a fairly complex subject, but even going into it a short way, you can see that BT, their assets are being handled completely differently by the VOA to any new entrant. And therefore, even without a maths degree, you can see that they're at a competitive advantage. And so the fact that that continues, and that, the courts right up to Brussels, I think, as well, have, not managed to, maybe they're all making it far too complicated. For us simple folk from out in the sticks, it seems really bloody obvious that BT have a very unfair advantage, and it's one of the reasons why, it does put off anyone planning to lay more than a certain amount of fibre. And, and the fact that the maths behind it is hidden makes it even more difficult for do they have to be a competitor to BT? They don't really. BT are not doing fibre in, at least 5% of the country. But once that competitor comes in and starts sticking fibre in the ground and then lights it, they have to pay a higher rate of business rates than BT do.
Well, Lindsay, let's just be clear about this. That old style of thing is accounted for slightly differently. BT's next generation access network is charged in the same way that everyone else is. But it seems to me that very few people are building NGA networks, so BT's still got it's paying 20 quid per fibre connection per year, £18 for a copper connection. If you were BT, what would you do?
I'd dig the copper out, make 2 pence. You know what I would do?
Well, I'd dig the copper out and flog it to the Chinese.
Well, yeah. But, we have to encourage small-scale rural industry, so we should be selling the copper to the Brits in the countryside to create new crafts to sell to China.
Well, the Chinese are looking for pretty much anything that moves in the way of metal and rare earths and things like that. So I'm not sure that thinking strategically, if somebody ever did want to make life difficult, to own all the rights to all the copper, all the refined stuff that we've got in this country, possibly I'd like to keep some in reserve.
Well, it would be nice for the British to retain ownership of at least a couple of things in the country. We seem to be flogging off absolutely everything from water, nuclear power, electric, forests. I think we're selling off now. It'll be your back garden next. Have you got one?
Well, I mean, it just shows what a great place Britain is to invest in if you're a foreigner.
Yeah. Mm. Yes, I don't think I would be putting critically sensitive infrastructure in the hands of a foreign power, to be honest.
Okay, we won't go into the Huawei story and BT at this point.
No. Not now. Not now. Not now.
All right. Okay, Lindsay, we've got 5 minutes. What do you think's on the agenda for next week?
I hope that at least one of the people who's currently under the channel can come on. I hope we can hear a little bit more about what's going on in Wales. I would really like to find an ISP who would like to talk about outages and how it's affecting them and what they see as the route forward. Not blame game, but how do we progress from here? If the network's not fit for purpose, what do we need to be doing and who's addressing that? And I would also like to see if we can get some catch-ups from some of the gigabit folk.
Right. Okay. Let's see if what we can do with that. Just to mention about the BT outages. So BT has copped to having a serious problem with outages on Saturday morning. That seemed to be nationwide. But they do say that it was fixed within a couple of hours. But I think we were speaking about ISPs and little communications companies having a lot of problems before this big outage happened. So,
yeah.
To quote Jerry Fishenden, ex-Microsoft scientist who's now working with the LSE, saying the lack of resilience in BT's network is going to be a problem. It's already proved to be an issue, but this cannot be left to chance. Somebody's got to take responsibility for it. BT,
so true.
BT is not talking about this at all, as far as I can tell.
What a surprise.
But
well, obviously, TechQT is here as a platform for people to come on and talk about it. So, if anyone out there wants to come on and talk about any of these issues, please just get in touch and come and join us in that little box down the bottom that we sit in while someone else is talking. All well behaved.
Okay. Shall we wrap it?
Yeah, let's wrap. Thank you very much, Ian, again.
Lindsay, always a pleasure. Let's do it again next week. Okay, 8 o'clock next week, Thursday. See you then.
Bye.